Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of the English Hour.
Hello, guys.
Yes, in this episode, we have a topic I think that most of you can relate to. It's stress, right?
Yep, stress. It is, permeates all parts of our lives. It is everywhere, and we have to find ways to cope with it.
Yes, in order to deal with this huge issue, we put some limits. So we'll first talk about the causes of stress, and then we'll talk about the ways people can deal with stress. So let's get started with the causes of stress. So Canberk, what do you think are the main causes of stress?
Okay, well, if we're gonna talk about stress, we have to first define what stress really is.
Yeah.
And in this context, we're basically referring to psychological stress. Because stress, by its nature, is everywhere. Just like friction. Friction is a part of our physical existence. And stress also is. For example, if you talk about physical stress, you can talk about pressure. You are putting pressure on everything you touch.
Yeah.
And you are getting a feedback, a response from it, so that you can function properly in the physical world. Even the very easy and simple task of opening a door requires you to put pressure on the handle and get a feedback from it.
That is true, but I think that's not what most people mean when they talk about stress.
Exactly. So when it's that point where we come to psychological stress, and that is, I think, about having things to do in life and having challenges and obstacles that get in our way. That's when stress happens.
I think I can see the connection. So you started off by talking about the stress in the physical sense. So in the physical sense, stress is a form of pressure, which is neutral. It might be good or bad depending on how you use it. But when it comes to psychological stress, it's a type of pressure on your mind, on your entire being, and it makes you feel overwhelmed. So I think, in short, I can say stress is feeling overwhelmed by outside pressure. Would you agree with that explanation?
I think I would agree with it partly in the sense that overwhelmed could be like completely negative stress, whereas stress in and of itself, as you said, is neutral, both in the physical world and in the psychological world. And what I mean by that is, the door example, we can proceed with that.
Yeah.
The door is an obstacle in front of you. If you want to go through it, like if you want to exit a room or enter a room, the door is an obstacle, and you're going to have to deal with that. And another obstacle that is approaching in my life, for example, is this science exam for my master's application. So I'm going to apply for a master's program, and I have this exam coming up, and I have to deal with that, and it's a source of stress.
I can't keep smiling because we all have different versions of this stress, and I've got my PhD application in front of me, so, I think we're suffering from different versions of the same problem. But honestly, it's not really suffering from, because I think we've got a strong footing, so it's not really about stress. It's more about, I don't feel that stress, but it feels good to talk about stress.
Exactly. And you know what? I think stress can be both positive and negative. I think you're right in saying that what people are really talking about when they talk about stress, when they say stress, is negative stress. But stress can easily be positive in the sense that this exam is coming up, right? And I have to make something happen, like I have to do something to pass that exam. And what I need to do is study. And when I study, what happens? I learn new things. I'm exposed to new concepts and new terminology. And I basically open up my mind to new possibilities. And by learning about these things, I become better versed in this new field of study that I want to, go ahead and enter. So what happens is, this is positive stress because I passed the exam and I learn all of those new things, and I grow as a human being.
That is true.
That is the expectation. Hopefully that's what's going to happen.
Okay, so here at this point, then I guess it's fair to say that one of the main causes of stress is the unexpected or the unknown. Because if something is familiar, if you know how to deal with something, if you've got experience with something, I think the chances of you feeling stress or being stressed about it is comparatively lower. But
that's right.
when something is novel, when something is unknown, then you feel a certain dose of stress. I think everyone feels stress, but the difference is how they deal with that stress or how they channel that stress towards their goals.
That's right. I think a lot of things can expand, amplify, or mitigate stress. One of the things, as you mentioned, is when there are many unknowns associated with the source of stress. Another could be emotions. If you attach a lot of emotions to the source of stress, then it becomes bigger and bigger. It becomes a problem. And I think maybe in this case we could talk about how we can cope with stress. And it's going to be very closely associated with the root causes of stress.
That is true, but I'd like to add something before we move on to
Please.
The ways how we can deal with stress. So I think when we talk about stress, we talk about this entity as something that people suffer from. That is true, but stress can take on many shapes for many people. It's not a concrete entity. It's something that differs from person to person. So what is stressful for you might not be stressful for me, or what is stressful for me might not be stressful
That's right.
for you. So if I have to play an instrument, well, that might be very stressful. But then if I have to sort of deal with a computer or a technical glitch, then I feel more at home. So it's not stressful. But then you can reverse the situation and you can find people who will be freaked out if they have to deal with some sort of technical error.
Yeah, well, I think stress is closely linked with performance.
And personal experience.
I'm thinking like on the basis of what you just said, playing the guitar, for example, and playing something like the soundtrack, main theme, theme track for Pirates of the Caribbean, for example, a movie, and it is a beautiful soundtrack. I really like listening to it. For example, I want to play it on the guitar. My brother is capable of doing that very easily, and he would actually enjoy doing that. Like if you ask him, okay, right, just break out the guitar and play it, no problem. Me, on the other hand, having virtually no experience on the guitar, it would take a lot of work, a lot of dedication, a lot of hours being spent on this, and it would be very stressful for me at this point in time. I can't perform it. And, lack of performance, lack of ability equals stress.
That is true. So, well, since we admitted that we might experience some sort of stress, it's time to talk about how we can deal with it. How can we sort of eliminate the stress or the stress factors? So what do you think?
I think unpacking any kind of stress is the way to go. Like the way I look at it, there are many things that compound the feeling of stress. And if you want to deal with it, you must first come to terms with it. And how do you come to terms with it? You basically try to understand where this stress is coming from. For example, in your case, you're going to defend your thesis, your PhD, your master's thesis. So if you feel stressed about it, are you feeling stressed about it a little bit?
Well, honestly, to be honest, I think I've lost that feeling of stress years ago. I think the most stress I had was when I was in the last year of high school. But after starting university, I sort of lost that feeling of stress or extreme excitement. It's true, I feel a certain dose of stress, but I think it's become quite manageable.
Mm-hmm. I see. So you're stressed, but you're not distressed.
Yeah, well.
So you're not overwhelmed.
The thing is, like, I feel like I can handle it. So it's like, well, my talk is on Monday, so I'll be presenting the thesis to my jury members in the audience. But I'm like, okay, well, the presentation is on Monday. I can easily deal with it on Saturday or Sunday, 1 days of work, because I'm really familiar with the material. I've spent years learning that material and months doing those experiments. So I know the inside out of the topic, and I'm like, okay, I've got a lot of experience, I've got a lot of information on this one, so I can deal with it, and that mitigates the stress. So I think it really ties back to the experience part. And also it's about attitude, because
that's right.
Well, when you feel that, well, there is nothing I can do about it, well, in this case, there is a lot you can do about it, and I've done my part, so I feel sort of comfortable, and it's like, okay, I've done my part, I can feel safe, or this is the best I can do, and the rest, God knows.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that, what you said is really significant. I really like that. You said you haven't felt real, like extreme dose of stress since high school. And I think I'm going to put it down to you having the ability to deal with stress. You have devised certain ways in which you deal with stress, and you have been using those ways and those strategies since then to deal with all kinds of stress in your life. If we take the same example, you defending your master's thesis, there are a few components to it. For example, it all comes down to preparation, right? Because the first point that you made was the unknowns, and being prepared is really, important for dealing with stress. You have to deal with stress in a way that is familiar. You have to get yourself ready for it, for the challenges or obstacles in your life. In your case, the not the master's thesis defense, you have to be prepared, right? There are a few components to it. First, delivery. Second is content. The content part, you've already written the thesis. You're the author of the thesis, and you understand the ins and outs of it. You know how it works, and you know what to do to answer the questions coming from the jury. So that part is content. The delivery part is you're going to talk to people. You're going to do some public speaking.
When it's something I like.
Exactly.
I enjoy personally.
Yeah, you're a teacher, you're an instructor. That's what you do for a living.
I love being in front of people. It's
exactly.
like when I can tell a story about something I'm passionate about, it's like I'm being rewarded. It's not something I keep away from.
Exactly. So in this case, you are not just surviving, but you're thriving in the face of a source of stress. So how you're doing it, you're basically prepared because you know the content and you like the delivery aspect of it. You like talking to people, addressing people. So the preparation part is complete. And the second is you have already devised ways of doing this. Like you are getting yourself prepared. How are you doing that? You have already studied enough for it. You've written the thesis itself. You have cultivated this skill of public speaking. You've already done those. I remember I remember talk of you actually. I haven't seen you, but the talk of you dressed, all suited up and, presenting that Obama speech in front of people and getting something like 95 or 100 out of 100. So that was a very impressive performance, the public speaking course.
I can remember those days. It was one of the most memorable days of my life, and I think it was a great course. It's one of the courses that has really helped me throughout my life and career.
Yeah, it has stuck with me as well. I did like a Malcolm X presentation. It was quite enjoyable as well. So
I even had some reporters in class.
Yeah, so it was so good, right? And you've been doing the work. You've been putting in the effort, and now you're reaping the fruits. So basically, how to deal with stress? You got to be prepared, and you got to devise ways of having that feeling of stress and not really freaking out. Just accepting it and going with it, like doing something out of it, like getting the lemons and making the lemonade, that type of thing.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I think I can give an example of a very effective strategy that can help people deal with stress and deal with their fears. And this is something I've found very inspiring and very actionable. So, for example, one of the speeches that I really like is the one by Steve Jobs during a Stanford commencement ceremony, I think.
Stay foolish, stay hungry?
Yes, that speech. I love that speech. And one of the things he said during that speech really stuck with me. And he said, in the face of death, everything disappears. Your fears, your hesitations. And in that case, when you put death in perspective, everything just fades away. And what remains is what is really important and what really matters to you. And it's like, okay, you might be stressed, you might have a lot of fears. That's normal, that's human nature. But then when you go about this, when you think, well, what is the worst that can happen? Like, I've got to talk, well, if I screw it up, I'll not be dying.
Yeah.
Like, there are people facing horrible consequences. I'll not face those consequences. This is just a speech. Or, well, I've got a lot of fears, but then you're still alive. You can do a lot more to rectify things if they go south. So I think the thought of death is a great motivator to help people move forward.
That's right. I agree. Well, I mean, it's like just being prepared emotionally, I guess. Like, you know, there are many things could happen. I remember listening to a comedian talk about bombing. And bombing is a term they use for completely failing to captivate an audience and making people laugh. When, you know, if you're a comedian, if you bomb, what that means is you're completely unsuccessful. Like, nobody just even like breaks a chuckle. Nobody even chuckles. Like, everybody's, oh my God, this person sucks, basically. So, and you know, the person speaking in this case, the comedian, Dave Chappelle, he's like one of the masters of this generation. And he says like, and up until the point that I bombed, I was very afraid, like deathly afraid of bombing. And that fear, you know, was always with me, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And when it actually finally happened, it was liberating, because I bombed, and I bombed in a way that was like beyond my expectations, the worst nightmares of bombing. And my friends were there, my people that I valued, whose opinion I valued, were there. And like when it happened, I was like, okay, I failed, and everybody's watching, and I haven't died, and everything is fine. And from that moment onwards, my career took off, because I let that fear go, and I focused on what was important. So I think, you know, it's really good to be emotionally prepared.
You know what? I've got a very personal experience that I'd like to share. It's been a while since I last thought about it, but I think this can really help a lot of people, because you can judge me. You can say, well, you're doing fine, you're successful and stuff, so there's no need to be stressed about things. You're having it great. But that's not always like that, because, you know, we have a public face and a private face. And when you put on your public face, you talk more about your accomplishments. You don't really necessarily talk about your horrible moments or downfalls and stuff like that. So I think it was in the second year of my master's, and I was going through some turbulent times, emotionally turbulent times, and it was just around the midterm time. So we were supposed to hand in our research papers, we were supposed to complete our presentations and everything. And I was feeling horrible, and I had an intense course load that term, and I had 4 or 5 really difficult courses with maybe hundreds of pages of reading and a lot of writing. And I was doing fine just up to the midterm period, but then, as I said, I went into a very turbulent mood. I had some problems with some people, and I was feeling down. And for the first time in my life, like, I had always been a great student, like, I had top grades and everything, and for the first time in my life, I failed 3 classes. 3 or 4, I don't quite remember. I failed 3 or 4 classes. I got an F because I failed to deliver the research papers on time, although I had done all the other work up until that point. And it was really painful. I can't deny it. It was really painful because, you've got this image of sort of maybe the perfect or close to perfect student, and everything you touch works, but then you're a human in the end, and I had that really horrible period, and that really impacted all the grades and everything. I felt like everything I did just went straight to garbage because, like, 4 classes, 4 really difficult classes, and like tens of hours of reading time and everything that I've done, I felt pretty horrible. Totally horrible. But then it was also a milestone moment. It was a turning moment because since I hit the rock bottom, there was nothing holding me back. I was like totally free, liberated, because I finally knew how it felt to be at the bottom. Mm-hmm. So I had that experience. No one could tell me, you don't know how that feels. Well, I know. I personally experienced that pitfall, and I can really say that it was liberating, and I think it has also helped me a lot to cope with stress, because since I hit the rock bottom, I knew all the problems, and I realized it's not really the end of the world. Well, it certainly tainted my perfect image, but it gave me a lot more, because after that, like, I recollected myself, and the next term and the term after, I retook those classes. I got straight A's. Like, imagine this. One term you get F, 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 and the other term you got A, A, A.
That's
and I was like, well, I can really make a comeback. And it really strengthened my personal image. And as I think someone I like tells this, but I can't remember the author, like, failure is not fatal and success is not final. So you'll certainly go between both ends. Life is not a constant stream. Things will happen. And I really think that hitting that rock bottom and experiencing difficulties makes you stronger in the long run. It prepares you for the hurdles that life might throw at you. So this is very personal, and it just came up when you talked about that comedian.
Yeah, I mean, that's a powerful story too. It's a very real story that you've lived through, and I think it prepared you for many of the decisions that you had to make in your professional life that were really, like, hard to make. For example, I'm reminded of the decision that you made to leave academia and establish your own business, which is a huge decision because you have this constant stream of financial funds that you have. Like, I mean, you left a regular paycheck for something that was, like, it was completely uncertain. It was whether, it could be a huge success, but it could also be like a gigantic failure. So you just stepped into uncharted territory and you tried to find your footing, and you struggled a little bit for an extended period of time maybe, but what kept you going was the fact that you've already been to places that was, like, maybe really hard. It was really hard to survive there, but you managed and you made a comeback and you were stronger and you knew that you could make it. And, that gave you courage, that gave you motivation to go through basically anything. So,
well, I really love quotes, because when you talk about this, when you give me a summary of what happened, I'm reminded of another quote, and it goes like this: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That definitely works.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think it's a good point to end the episode. dealing with stress is a personal experience for sure for every one of us. And we go through a lot of things in life that, that are extreme sources of stress. But everything is really a learning experience if you want to view it as such, and if you have the awareness to recognize it as such. So on that note, I think it has been a good episode, and I've enjoyed it. Anything you want to say before we close it?
I think life is a lesson in the making. It is something you make. It is something you study. It's something you learn from. And stress is naturally a part of it.
Exactly.
But you should not play the victim mentality. You should try to be proactive. You should try to view things from different angles. And because if you feel like and act like a victim, then it's normal to feel extreme doses of stress. But if you are proactive, if you take responsibility for what you did or for what happened, and if you try to solve problems rather than cry about problems, then I think you'll be a much better person when it comes to dealing with stress.
I agree. Taking responsibility is definitely empowering, Otherwise, if you feel like you're the victim, you're basically taking all power away from yourself, and it affects your self-image, and it basically completely robs you of any ability for any comeback that you talked about, or any ability for growth.
That is true.
Growth and improvement. Okay, so that was great, and I guess see you guys.
Yeah, we'll see you in the next episode, and it's been a great conversation. Thank you, John Berk.
All right, thank you, Hussein. Bye bye.
Bye bye.